Welcome to the Delmarva Almanac. Each week, we connect you to the best of Delmarva. Like other almanacs, our aim is to tell you a little bit about our past, our present, and events in the near future. I'm your host, Dana Kester McCabe. Princess Anne has an interesting history, but I recently came across a character who was born there that has largely been forgotten. Charles Chaillé-Long was born in Princess Anne July 2nd, 1842. His parents were plantation owners whose ancestry was part French Huguenot and part English. His biographical information indicates that he attended Washington Academy in Maryland, which is probably a reference to Washington College. He did not finish because he felt called, quite to the contrary of family and neighbors back home, to join Union forces during the Civil War in 1862. He enlisted in the 1st Maryland Infantry, serving with his regiment until the end of the war and rising to the rank of captain. Charles, like many officers in both the Union and Confederate armies, was bitten by their taste for wartime adventures. Returning home to a quiet life held little attraction for them. Like they say in the movies, they wanted to travel the world seeking fortune and glory. Charles loved all the pomp and circumstance of being an officer. He had a reputation for his vanity, wearing a very fancy uniform including a lot of gold braid and a red-lined cape. In 1869, Charles answered a want ad for soldiers to join the army of the Khedive of Egypt. He was a viceroy of the Ottoman Empire. They had a tenuous relationship with Great Britain, who was now our ally. Americans were now taking their place alongside British soldiers in Africa. The Khedive, Ismail, wanted to consolidate his control over Egypt and expand its borders. The British wanted to suppress the slave trade and establish other types of trade centers. By 1872, Charles Chaillé-Long was assigned to be chief of staff to a Brit named General Charles Gordon. He was then immediately dispatched on a secret mission to secure a strategic treaty with a tribal chief named King Matsei in present-day Uganda. On the way there, he explored parts of the Nile that had never been visited by outsiders. His journals added valuable information to the work of famed explorers Stanley and Livingstone, connecting the Nile to its source in Lake Victoria. He is also said to have discovered Lake Kyoga. Sadly, he was not a great map maker. His calculations on the size of Lake Victoria were so off that British geographers ridiculed him. He had a running feud with the British Royal Geographical Society because he was not allowed to name the lake he discovered after his patron's father. Later campaigns for the Khedive took him south. One expedition led to the opening up of an equatorial road from the Indian Ocean along the Juba River to the Central African lakes. You're listening to the Delmarva Almanac. I'm Dana Kester McCabe, and this is the story of Delmarva native Charles Chaillé-Long. Throughout his time in Africa working for the Khedive of Egypt, Charles Chaillé-Long and the troops under his command fought off attacks from unfriendly tribes. He seems to have accomplished his diplomatic missions in part by not objecting to the practice of human sacrifices made in his honor. In his memoirs, Charles attempts to record scientifically the cultures and natural wonders of Africa. He describes being appalled by many atrocities, but he glosses over the practice of tribal chiefs giving women and children as gifts to visiting dignitaries. He claims that because they were nomadic people, this was simply part of their culture, and when it was for the betterment of their chief, they saw it as an honor. At various times, he took on several hundred as refugees. Charles, in turn, gave them in marriage to other chiefs and soldiers, supposedly making everyone very happy and increasing his diplomatic stature. Those Charles was given directly, he either gave away, using them to his diplomatic advantage, or sent to school in Cairo. I have to stop here and say that while it may have seemed to Charles that he had found the most ethical solution for these circumstances, this all still seems horrific. Only a conqueror who had no further contact with those displaced people could believe that they were willing, even honored, to be owned by someone else. I suppose it's possible, but I find it unlikely. But then I'm looking through the lenses of what we think now. On the plus side, Charles was often showered with other riches by those chiefs who wanted to curry favor. He routinely distributed these among his troops or gave them to other chiefs to build goodwill. He could have left Africa a very wealthy man if he had followed General Gordon's advice to keep some for himself. Charles returned home in 1877, taking with him almost nothing save a case of malaria. But, ever industrious, he used his time recovering to get a law degree at Columbia University, graduating in 1880. He then returned to foreign service in Egypt. When he got there, the government of his benefactor, Khedive Ismail, was under fire for bankrupting the country. The British had sided with the Ottomans against him and an insurrection of Arab tribes. There was a terrible massacre. Charles led a group of Americans to the protection of a nearby detachment of American Marines. Together they reestablished the U.S. consulate in Alexandria, where he became the temporary consul general. In July of 1890, he returned home again and married Marie Hammond, the daughter of a well-to-do American general. You have to wonder if this was not some sort of arranged marriage, because by the very next December he had returned to Egypt, leaving Marie stateside. Charles then had a succession of jobs, none of which lasted very long. Eventually he returned permanently to the U.S. Charles seems to have spent his golden years recounting his exploits in magazine articles and traveling on the lecture circuit. He eventually won the accolades he wanted so much. The Maryland General Assembly created a special gold medal to honor him, and the American Geographical Society awarded him for his contributions to the field of geography. Charles Chaillé-Long died March 29, 1917, and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery, along with most of the tales of his adventures. Well, that's all for this edition of the Delmarva Almanac. We'd like to thank our community partners, the Friends of Delmarva Public Radio, the Community Foundation of the Eastern Shore, and underwriters EatDrinkBuyArt.com for their help in bringing this program to you, our audience. Our theme music was provided by Brightside Studio. This show has been a Moonshell production. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, may the rhythms and tides of Delmarva bring you good fortune.